We begin my week 4 quarterback rankings with quarterbacks that I think you should avoid at all costs. Now, this isn't saying that they aren't real life talented quarterbacks. I'm saying that in fantasy football this week specifically, you should probably avoid them because there are a ton of better options. At 30, I have Skylar Thompson, 29, Jacoby Brissett, 28, Will Levis, 27, Bo Nix, and 26, Matt Stafford. Skylar Thompson has looked very poor for fantasy despite being in arguably one of the best situations imaginable. And so I would avoid him and I would have every other quarterback ahead of him. With Jacoby Brissett, we just haven't seen any upside from him. And San Francisco does have a ferocious pass rush. And New England's offensive line is pretty bad as well. I think he's going to get sacked a lot, and I just don't think he has that much upside. With Will Levis against Miami, it's a brutal matchup for him. He's been very underwhelming for us in fantasy for the most part. And so I think there are tons of better options this week, and it's just a really poor matchup for him. With Bo Nix against the Jets, in my opinion, this is the worst matchup you can draw in fantasy football for a quarterback. So yeah, I would just avoid him if you can. It's, once again, a very, very difficult matchup this week against the Jets. With Matt Stafford, he is missing his top 2 wide receivers, offensive linemen, against the Chicago Bears defense. There isn't really much more to say. He's a very talented real-life quarterback, but in fantasy, I would avoid him at all costs this week. Quarterbacks that I think are probably low-end QB2s to high-end QB3s are Gardner Minshew, Justin Herbert, and Kirk Cousins. Gardner Minshew is going to be without Devontae Adams this week. The Browns are also going to be without Myles Garrett, so that is somewhat of an offset, but he has Brock Bowers and then Jacoby Myers and Michael Mayer remaining, so I think that the upside is a little bit limited this week, and I just don't like the matchup even without Myles Garrett against Cleveland. With Justin Herbert, he should be so much higher on this list. It's just that in this Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh offense, they just run. It's completely destroyed the upside that we saw from him in previous seasons. And even though it should be a game in which they have to pass quite often, until I see upside from him on a week-to-week basis, it's hard to have him inside the top 20. With Kirk Cousins against New Orleans, it's not a great matchup. I do think they have to throw the ball a lot. It's just he presents no rushing upside. So unless he has a multiple touchdown game, you're probably not too happy with the results here. And there are a lot of quarterbacks with a lot more upside than Kirk Cousins in week 4. Quarterbacks that I think are probably mid to low end QB2s this week, but they do have some upside, are Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, Andy Dalton, T-Law, Aaron Rodgers, and Sam Darnold. Baker Mayfield faces off against Philly. I don't like the matchup. Their pass rush is absolutely ferocious. I do think he's a little bit more matchup dependent than we might have thought coming into the season because he was fantastic last year and at the beginning of this season. And so I think there's going to be better days ahead from him in better matchups. I don't like this one against Philly. With Deshaun Watson against Las Vegas, it's a great matchup for him. He is going to be without David Njoku, though. And until we get David Njoku back in this offense, I do think that his upside generally is going to be somewhat limited, but he still gives you rushing upside. And so he's more so a very safe floor quarterback than an upside play generally. But there are worse quarterbacks, obviously, for fantasy. With Andy Dalton against Cincy, I do like the matchup. It's just I want to see more than 1 week from Andy Dalton before we just push him too far up these rankings. If he has a similar game to last week, then he's going way further up in these rankings. But yeah, he doesn't provide any rushing upside, so there's just more upside further ahead in this list. With T-Law against Houston, it's a fantastic matchup. They do have 2 very good edge rushers in Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter. I do think that he's going to be able to pass this game, though. He hasn't performed well in fantasy so far, but he's a very streaky player, and we've seen incredible upside on a week-to-week basis from him in his career. I mean, he finished as a QB1 2 years ago and a high-end QB2 last season. And so while he is off to a poor start, there is upside with T-Law, and I think this is a game where he presents you with a lot more upside than we've seen in past weeks. But until we see one of those 25-point games from him, it's hard to have him further up in these rankings. With A-Rod against Denver, It's a shame for Garrett Wilson that he's facing the most elite set of cornerbacks right in a row that I've probably ever seen for a wide receiver. I don't like the matchup for him against Pat Surtain. Aaron Rodgers does present a good amount of upside, though. The offense is heating up. I just think that Breece Hall has the better fantasy finish this week than Aaron Rodgers does in particular. Sam Darnold faces off against Green Bay. It isn't the best matchup, but it could definitely be worse. I think he has a multi-touchdown game, but I do think he throws a pick in this one. And so he does present you with upside. It's just there's players with much better matchups ahead of him. Quarterbacks that I think are probably mid to high end QB2s this week with QB1 potential upside are Caleb Williams, Derek Carr, A-Rich, and Jared Goff. Caleb Williams, he faces off against the Rams. It is one of the best matchups you can draw. And so I do think in matchups in which he faces poor defenses that he can be played and be very useful for us in fantasy. I just think it's the games in which he faces elite defenses or at least defenses with elite pass rushes in particular that we have to be careful with him. But yeah, I do think he has a decent game this week. With Derek Carr against Atlanta, we've seen incredible upside from him. He did not have the best week last week. And so I want to see one more game from him that he presents us with a ton of upside, and then he'll probably be in the top 10 regularly. But yeah, it's a pretty good matchup against Atlanta, and the offense overall has looked tremendous this season. A-Rich is playing Pittsburgh this week. It's a terrible matchup. He does present you with a very low floor at times, but he also possesses an incredible ceiling. I will say, the past 2 weeks, he's been tackled multiple times right next to the goal line where he could have had rushing touchdowns. And so I think that his fantasy finishes could have been much, much higher the past 2 weeks. He's just been very incredibly unlucky in that regard. And so I think he gets a rushing touchdown this week. It's just, I don't think we see one of these high upside weeks from him that we would potentially see against more vulnerable defenses like Houston. Jared Goff is playing Seattle this week. He's matched up against Devon Witherspoon and Reek Woolen. Don't like that. However, it's such a great offense in Detroit that you're starting him no matter what. He's a very safe floor play on a week-to-week basis with a generally decent ceiling as well. I don't think we see a ceiling game from him, but I think he's a very safe floor play for us this week. If you like what you're seeing and hearing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel. I detail out projections for every single NFL game with the exception of Thursday night games. And if you like what you're seeing, feel free to support by liking and subscribing. Thank you. Quarterbacks that I think are going to be low-end QB1s are Geno Smith, Brock Purdy, Justin Fields, and Jordan Love. Geno Smith faces off against Detroit. They are one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. He's going to have to throw to stay in this game with Detroit, and so I think he has a multi-touchdown game. It's just without the rushing upside, he's probably not going to be an elite QB1. But yeah, you're starting him with confidence this week. He has the full cast of receivers in JSN, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf. Noah Fant should play as well. He had a good game last week. And so I really like Geno this week against Detroit. Brock Purdy is facing off against the Patriots. Christian Gonzalez is an elite cover corner. And so I do think that Brandon Ayuk faces off against him for the most part. But the offense is so efficient, and he does have George Kittle back. I think that is key here. I think Kittle has a very, very good game this week. And so I think he does throw a couple touchdowns, but I also think he probably throws a pick in this game. Justin Fields plays the Colts this week. It's a fantastic matchup. I think he presents you with a ton of rushing upside. Through the air, he hasn't really given us too much, but I do like him this week. I think that he has the potential for a massive blow-up game, but I'm not going to project him for one, but just keep in mind that he is a very high upside play this week. At 9, I have Jordan Love. I'm assuming he plays this week. He's gotten some limited practices in. It's not a great matchup against Minnesota, but their offense is so friendly to quarterbacks that I don't think you can bench him against anybody really, even if it's the Jets. And I think he has a multi-touchdown game. It's just the upside that we could see in much better matchups probably isn't going to be here this week. But if you have him, I don't really see how you can afford to bench him really. Quarterbacks that I think are generally going to finish much higher, but are just finding themselves playing against very good defenses this week are Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. Patrick Mahomes has gotten off to a little bit of a slow start. It isn't a great matchup against the Chargers. He's still the elite quarterback that we've known for years, though. Things are going to get better for him. We just haven't seen it yet. But if you have Mahomes, there, I don't see, unless you have one of the players ranked ahead of him, how you could possibly afford to sit him this week. Lamar Jackson faces off against Buffalo. They have been brutal. They've really surprised me. For the season, I thought they were going to be one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And so props to them. Lamar, however, presents you with massive rushing upside every single week. I just don't think we have a ceiling game from him this week against Buffalo. Quarterbacks that are must-start QB1s are Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, Jalen Hurts, and Josh Allen. Joe Burrow has been lighting it up recently, him and Jamar Chase. He does have T. Higgins back, along with Yosivas. And so I think that trio of wide receivers is going to be too much for the Panthers this week. And so if you have Joe Burrow, he's a must-start. Jaden Daniels, wow. That game this past week was literally the best rookie game ever by a quarterback. He had, what was it, a 93% completion percentage. He is the real deal. They are simplifying the offense for him, which is great for him. He's going to be an amazing pro. I was really worried before the season about his offensive line and Cliff Kingsbury in general, but he has surprised me. Great for him, and he is an elite QB1 for us in fantasy. I think he's going to have a fantastic career. And against Arizona, he is an absolute must start. He could easily be the QB1. With Kyler Murray against Washington, it's also just like with Jaden Daniels. He has the upside to be the QB1 overall. Washington's defense is very poor. And so Kyler Murray has a ton of upside. We haven't seen one of those blow up games from him, but I think that there's a very real possibility we see that in week 4. CJ Stroud is facing Jacksonville. We could have a 30-point game potentially from him if he happens to score a couple more touchdowns than I project. Jacksonville's defense is atrocious. We saw Josh Allen have, 4 touchdowns in one half. And so CJ Stroud, while he isn't quite Josh Allen, he's still an elite quarterback. And if you have him, you're starting him with the most confidence probably out of any game so far this season. Jalen Hurts faces off against Tampa Bay. It's a fantastic matchup for him. I don't project him to have A.J. Brown. He's definitely not going to have Devontae Smith, but he still has Goddard and Saquon Barkley. I think he and Saquon Barkley have massive games. I'd project Jalen Hurts for 2 rushing touchdowns this week, which isn't the norm. But I think with them being a little bit shorthanded in the passing game, I think they're going to ask him to do that on the ground. Josh Allen is facing Baltimore. It was quite depressing as a Baltimore fan to see Dak Prescott almost come back against us. So yeah, Baltimore is very streaky at times. They have the potential to be an elite defense, but after playing really well against Dallas for most of the game, they just absolutely fell apart at the end. Josh Allen, I think, is going to be too much for Baltimore. I think he has a massive game. I think that overall this is going to be a relatively high-scoring game between the two teams. I do think that Josh Allen is probably the QB1 and by a decent margin this week, especially with what we saw this past week against Jacksonville. And it turns out, even without Stephon Diggs, this guy has elite QB1 potential. Quarterbacks that I am avoiding at all costs in fantasy this week are Skylar Thompson, Jacoby Brissett, Will Levis, Bo Nix, and Matt Stafford. Quarterbacks that I think are probably low-end QB2s to potentially a high-end 3s are Gardner Minshew, Justin Herbert, and Kirk Cousins. Quarterbacks that I think are probably mid to low-end QB2s with potential low-end QB1 upside are Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, Andy Dalton, T-Law, Aaron Rodgers, and Sam Darnold. Quarterbacks that I think are probably high-end QB2s to potentially mid QB2s are Caleb Williams, Derek Carr, A-Rich, and Jared Goff. Quarterbacks that I think are probably low-end QB1s but with mid QB1 potential are Geno Smith, Brock Purdy, Justin Fields, and Jordan Love. Quarterbacks that I would usually have in the elite tier but just so happen to face off against very, very good defenses are Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. And then quarterbacks with great matchups that should be QB1s with the potential to easily be the QB1 overall this week are Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, Jalen Hurts, and Josh Allen. Alright, who do I have too high on this list? Who do I have too low? Let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. With that being said, if you like what you've seen and heard in this video, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you and have a good day.